All right, friends, our recording is officially started. I'm going to turn on my volume. All right. We're missing a few people, but Mrs. Knife wants to get started because I've been waiting all weekend to read this book because this book just makes me so happy. All right. Oh, I did not check ReadWorks this morning, but if your ReadWorks isn't done by now, that's not good, Molly. If your ReadWorks isn't done by now, it's late. So hopefully you did it. I'll be checking it once we get off of reading RTI. Hopefully you got it done. All right, we're going to hop on into chapter 12. Remember, he just had breakfast at Mr. Lewis's daughter's house, and Mr. Lewis is going to take him back to Grand Rapids, where Bud said he was from, even though he's not really from there. Tricky. All right, chapter 12. Hey, don't forget to be naming your chapter titles as we're going along. Okay. After breakfast, me and Mr. Lewis said goodbye to the Sleets and got back into the car. I leaned over the seat to put my suitcase in the back. Mr. Lewis, someone stole all the blood last night. He said, I'll say one thing for you, Bud. When you go to sleep, you go way to sleep. You don't remember anything from last night after we got to Flint? I said, I don't think so, sir. After you so rudely fell asleep on me, we dropped the blood off at Hurley Hospital. Then I gassed up that I got in touch with your daddy to let him know you were all right. Okay. Mr. Calloway doesn't know who Bud is, and Herman E. Calloway doesn't know who Bud is, and he doesn't know that he's missing Bud. But apparently Mr. Lewis said, got in touch with him. So Bud's like, uh-oh. What did you say, sir? I didn't call him. I sent a telegram to the log cabin. He still owns that club, doesn't he? Yes, sir. Bud literally has no idea if he actually owns it or not. Bud's just hoping. Good. Lefty Lewis leaned over and reached into the glove box of the car. He pulled out a flimsy piece of yellow paper and handed it to me. Across the top of the paper, it said in big yellows, Western Union. Underneath it said, heck, stop. But okay in Flint, stop. At 4309 North Street, stop. Return 8 p.m. Wednesday, stop. Lefty, stop. So that's what the telegram said. And do you know what that means? No, I don't know what that means either. So we're about to find out what that means. Man, I'll bet Herman E. Calloway was just as confused by this message as I was. I said, what does this mean, sir? Lefty Lewis said, when you send a telegram, the more letters you use, the more money you have to pay. So you try to keep your message as short as you can. Here, let me see it. I handed him the paper. He said, okay, HEC. That stands for your dad, Herman E. Calloway. Bud, okay, in Flint. That hit lets him know how far you got and that you're safe. And you did get pretty far, Bud. Maybe he won't be too hard on you when he sees how resourceful you were at running away. I know I've been darn proud of one of my kids if they've gotten that far, but I used to offer them money to run away and they'd never take it. At 4309 North Street, that's my daughter's address, and return 8 p.m. Wednesday, Wed lets him know I'm bringing you home by 8 tonight. I said, what are all those stops, sir? He said, that's the telegram's office way of saying period. It just means that the sentence is over. So,
what page are we on?
132. So, anyways, the weird stops, that just is like a way of putting a period in a telegram. So in case you didn't know that, now you know. Lefty Lewis spent most of the day doing errands all around Flint. He made me promise to wait in the car for him. I was good and happy when he said, that's it, Bud. Time to head home. We drove past the sign that said, welcome to Flint on one side when he looked up and said, uh-oh. Suddenly, a siren went off, sounding like it was in the back seat of the car. I raised my head up over the seat out the back window. Uh-oh was right. There was a Flint police car right behind us with the red light on top of his roof flashing on and off with the siren blasting. They'd found me. So Bud, he's been a runaway. So he's like, oh snap, police caught me. Dang, I'm caught. Oh no. Shucks, this doggone FBI was as good as the movies said it was. They were just those Royal Canadian Mountain Police. They'd always get their man. I crouched down as low as I could. Lefty Lewis pulled the car over on the side of the road and said real calm and real slow, Bud, it's very important that you listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you and that you do exactly as I say. He kept his eyes stuck on the rearview mirror. By the way he was acting, I was starting to think that maybe Lefty Lewis was on the lam too. And wait a minute, how come this man didn't have a real name? Who's heard of someone's mama naming him Lefty? That name has alias written all over it. Remember, an alias is a fake name. Lefty sounds like a real good name for a stick-up man. It seemed like it was real easy for Machine Gun Kelly to point at poor Slav and say, that's the guy that ratted me out, Lefty, finish him off. Fun fact, Machine Gun Kelly, if you know who that is in today's world, he's a rapper. But Machine Gun Kelly was actually a gangster during the Great Depression and stuff. So fun fact, Machine Gun Kelly, the rapper, got his name from Machine Gun Kelly, the gangster. There's a little background knowledge for you there. So in case you've ever heard the song Rap Devil, which hopefully you haven't because it's not a good song. But if you've ever heard that song, it is, Machine Gun Kelly's making fun of Eminem. He's saying you were named after a candy and I was named after a gangster. And I know Mrs. Kneifel's cool. She listens to some rap music sometimes. So anyways, Machine Gun Kelly, the rapper, is named after the gangster. So he's just saying snap. Lefty Lewis, that can't be a real name. Clearly, he's a stick-up man. He's getting caught by the police and Bud's like on a panic. Because he's a kid. And he's like, oh my God, why are the police pulling us over? Oh no. And that's and what he just said about listening and doing exactly what he said was number 8 on Bud Caldwell's Rules and Things to Having a Funner Life and Making a Better Liar Out of Yourself. So here's the rules and things. Number 8. Dun, da, da, da. Whenever a adult tells you to listen carefully and talks to you in a real calm voice, do not listen. Run as fast as you can because something real terrible is just around the corner, especially if the cops are chasing you. I think this one's funny because, like, when has he ever been in this situation before? Why would he even have this rule already? So I think this rule's a little silly. I stared at Lefty Lewis, keeping my fingers crossed that the next thing he wouldn't be, you'll never take us alive, copper. Instead, he said, Bud, are you listening, Bud? I had to play along until I got the chance to make a break. I said, yes, sir. Attaboy. First, close your mouth. Good. Now, I want you to take that box that is next to me and quickly put it all the way beneath your seat. I picked up the box that was about the size of a big, thick book and slid it under my seat. Lefty Lewis said, good boy. Now stay put and don't say anything. He winked at me and said, don't worry. It's all right. Okay, so Lefty Lewis had him hide a box. Okay, what's in the box? We don't know. He opened his door and walked back to the police car. I tried to decide what to do. If I make a break for it, I was sure the coppers would plug me. But maybe Lefty Lewis would wrestle the gun away before they got a good shot off. Or maybe, just maybe, Lefty would take a bullet for me. So plug me, he's saying, like, maybe they're going to shoot him if he was to just get out of the car. First off, if you ever stop at the police, you shouldn't just be hopping out of a car and running away. That's not safe. That's looking real suspicious. So right now, Bud's like, oh, what should I do? I have no idea because he's a kid. Okay, I told myself, I'm going to count to 10. Then I'm going to reach into the back seat, snatch my suitcase, and book out for those buildings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I'm going to count to 10 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, this time I'm really, really going to grab that doggone. The cops and Lefty Lewis were standing at the door. The cop said, I want to take a look in the trunk. Him and Mr. Lewis went around to the back, and the trunk opened, and I heard someone rambling around in it. I heard a loud bang and nearly jumped out of my seat. Whew! It was only Mr. Lewis closing the trunk. They walked back to the driver's door. The policeman looked in the back seat and said, what's in that suitcase? Mr. Lewis said, those are Bud's things. He was visiting here in Flint. I'm taking him home to Grand Rapids. The policeman looked at me and said, oh, your grandson, huh? You two look just alike. Lefty Lewis said, why, thank you, officer. I always thought the boy was unusually handsome. The cop didn't have a good sense of humor. He said, all right, you're free to go, but can't be too careful. I don't know if you've heard, but we're having a lot of trouble in the factories here. We've been stopping all cars we don't recognize. There's been reports that some of those stinking labor organizers might be sneaking up here from Detroit. Mr. Lewis said, you don't say? The cop said, drive carefully, and he touched the brim of his hat the way a cowboy in moving picture does. Lefty Lewis got in the car, started it, and pulled back onto the highway. All right, so he's taught labor organizers. So a long time ago, I don't know if you've ever heard of a union. Some of you probably have parents that work in a union. Mrs. Kneifel's in the teachers union. And it's just a union is like a group of people that try to make, your job as good as possible for you. So a long time ago, there wasn't unions. So labor organizers would be the people trying to make unions. But people don't like unions because then they cost workers more, they cost employers more money and all this crazy stuff. So the cop was apparently stopping Mr. Lewis because he didn't recognize his car and because there's apparently labor organizers. Sorry, I cannot say that. Labor organizers coming up from Detroit. So, anyways, he was stopped. Okay, Mr. Lewis was stopped. We don't know anything about it. But remember, he had to hide a box. So maybe he is part of it. I don't know. We're going to find out. He made a scary face at me and said, "Bud, this has really been a couple of lucky days for you. First, I saved you from being eaten by some vampires in Awasas. Then you seem to have survived my daughter's pancakes. And finally, that police officer saves you from the fearless and loathsome labor organizers of Detroit. You are truly blessed." So he's being nice and sarcastic here because Lefty Lewis is extra, extra sarcastic. Angelina, do you have a question?
I was just thinking about it, like in the beginning of the book with his foster families where he was placed. He was placed with how do I put this? Light skins, but his culture isn't. And during the book, it's kind of like but scared because he doesn't know what's going to happen, and it's kind of, I don't know how to put it, but I don't know. It's just a way of my understanding from the book because in the beginning he was placed with the Amoses and then he was getting beaten and kicked and punched and spit on and pencil stuck up his nose by by their son. Then he's on the lam and he's trying to find a way, but better yet, every time he tries to find his way, something that just gets thrown at him and he can't figure it out.
Yeah, so poor Mr. Bud's got this hard knock life, literally. Like, he's having rough times, but luckily he is with Lefty Lewis. And Lefty Lewis is hopefully going to drive him back to Grand Rapids. Like, that's the plan. So they just were stopped by the police officers, but now they're trucking along. So hopefully he's actually going to get to Grand Rapids. And that's what we're going to see because this whole book, well, not the whole book, but since he decided, I'm going to go find my dad, who he thinks is his dad, we really still have no clue if it's his dad or not. Like, we do not know that. He just is assuming. So he hopefully is actually going to make it to Grand Rapids now. Like, hopefully there won't be other things getting in his way. We're going to find out. Lefty Lewis was back to acting normal, and I kept wondering what was in the box he didn't want the cop to see. I said, "What's a labor organizer, sir?" Mr. Lewis said, "In Flint, there are people who are trying to get unions in the automobile factories." Before I had the chance to get my next question in, Lefty Lewis said, "I'm going to save your breath for you, bud. The next thing out of your mouth is going to be, what's a union, right?" Yes, sir. A union is like a family. It's when a group of workers get together and try to make things better for themselves and their children. That's all, sir? That's all. Then why are the cops after them? That's a very good question. Look in that box you put under your seat. I pulled out the box and put it in my lap and looked over at Lefty Lewis. He looked back at me and checked the rear mirror. Go ahead. I stopped for a second. Maybe there's a loaded and cocked pistol hiding in that box. Maybe Lefty Lewis would have shot it out at the cop if he'd tried to take us to jail. I started rising the top off the box, and just as I was about... Sorry. I started rising to the top of the box, and just as I was about to get it open, Lefty Lewis moved a lot faster than you'd think somebody's granddad could and slapped the hand on top of it, closed it back tight. Uh-oh. Maybe this is the loot from a bank that him and Al Capone had knocked over. Maybe Lefty Lewis would have to rub me out if I saw what was inside. Maybe... if I looked, I'd know too much. Mr. Lewis said, "Before you look, Bud, you've got to understand that what's in there is very dangerous." Okay, so Bud's like trying to open up this box. Then Lefty Lewis was like, "Bam! No, don't open the box. It's dangerous." And now Bud's like, okay, he's a kid. Like, if Mrs. Kneifel, someone's like, what's in the box is dangerous, I'm going to be like, I didn't want to look in the box anyways, okay? Like, you keep the box. Not my problem. So, oh, snap. I said, "Well, sir, I don't really think I need to see it, sir. I think I'll just look out the window until we get to Grand Rapids. Or maybe I give a big fake yawn. Maybe I'll take a nap." He laughed and said, "You're a lot smarter than you look, Bud. You know it would have been curtains for us if that copper would have seen what's in there." He tapped the top of the box. All I could say was, yes, sir. He said, go ahead and open it, but you have to promise, no, you have to swear that you won't breathe a word about what you see to anyone. Mr. Lewis, sir, I'd really rather take a nap. Well, first open the box. I took a big gulp of air and started to rise the top of the box again. Lefty Lewis said, Bud! I jumped so high I nearly banged my head on the roof of the car. I yelled back, yes, sir? I didn't hear you swear to keep your lips locked. Aw, shucks, Mr. Lewis, I swear, but I'd feel a lot better if I could take a doggone nap. I snatched the top of the box off the box and got ready to be scared to death. It was just some paper with writing on it. Maybe the pistol or the loot was under all this paper. I kept lifting paper until I got to the bottom of the box. Nothing. I looked at Lefty Lewis. He said, I warned you, pretty dangerous, isn't it? Once again, Mr. Lewis is being sarcastic, like it's literally paper. Like paper's not going to hurt anyone. I must have missed something. I went through the box again. How's some paper dangerous, sir? Read it. I took one of the papers out. It said, attention railroad workers, a newly formed Grand Rapids branch of the Brotherhood of Pullman Porters will be holding an informational meeting on Wednesday, July 23rd, 1936. All invested parties, please come to 2345 Coldbrook at 9. Refreshments will be served. You know what we're up against. Please keep this confidential as possible. It was starting to make sense. I said, Mr. Lewis, are you one of those labor organizers? He laughed. Not really, bud. I'm picking these up so we can pass them out in Grand Rapids. We've been negotiating to get a union for the Pullman Porters for years now, and nowhere in Grand Rapids will print these flyers for us. The only place that would do them is all the way in Flint. And you were running away a pretty hot town, young man. Wow. That trouble the policeman was talking about at the factory is called a sit-down strike. Instead of walking in front of the plant with signs, the people who are on strike just sit down on their job. That way the bosses can't bring other people in to steal their jobs. They're going to sit there until the company gives them a union. So the company is trying everything they can think of to get them out. That's why I said those fires are so dangerous. The people who run the factories and railroads seem to be really scared. To them, if a worker has any dignity or pride, he can't be doing a good job. All right, so Mr. Lewis is kind of like the laborers, part of one of those guys, but he's a Pullman porter, which is, remember, he carries bags onto trains for people, and they've already been trying to get a union, so that's not a new thing. The automobile factories, which in Michigan there still are, like the Ford Motor Companies up there and stuff, that is a new thing for them. And a sit-down strike, that's a real-life thing. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a strike, but you go around and you're like, strike, we're not working with your little sign. But a sit-down strike is way more it's just a lot different. Because a sit-down strike, no one's seeing it happen because you're sitting inside your building. If Mrs. Kneifel was like, I would not, let me repeat, would not do this. But if Mrs. Kneifel was like, I'm going to have a sit-down strike on my job, then I'm just going to stay in my classroom and sit. That way, another teacher couldn't just come in and teach. So all these people at the factory are sitting down at their job. That way, no one else can come in and do their job. So it's just a little bit more effective than just a regular strike, supposedly. I don't really know. So anyways, that's just a little information on the Great Depression. People are trying to get better wages for themselves and, better working conditions and things like that. And that's the whole reason for unions. Boy, these automobiles were great for making you conk out. Between the car floating real soft down the road and Lefty Lewis's boring stories about the railroad and the union and baseball, I was out cold in no time. When I woke up, I looked out the window and stretched. Lefty Lewis said, I was about to take you to Butterworth Hospital. I thought you'd left the earth for good. He pointed out the window and said, looking familiar? All right. He's from Flint, never left Flint, and he's heading his little self to Grand Rapids. So, is what he's seen looking familiar? Type it in my chat. Is what he's seeing looking familiar? No, it is not looking familiar at all because he's never been there. He's never been this far towards Grand Rapids. But remember, Lefty Lewis thinks he's from Grand Rapids. So he's like, oh, yeah, bud, you must remember all this because this is where you're from. And he's like, yeah, I do. But he really doesn't. Uh-oh. Yes, sir. I pointed at the gasoline filling station. Yup, there's gasoline filling station. He said, I guess your daddy would have burned premium in that big Packer, wouldn't he? I don't think those big engines can run on ethanol gasoline. I said, no, sir, that's right. He told me, well, you and your daddy sure have one beautiful machine. I was getting real nervous, but I said, thank you, sir. He's getting nervous because he's full of lies. Anyone know what a Packard is? That big Packard. You want to give me a guess what a Packard is? First off, we're talking about a gas station. So what might a Packard be? It is. It's a type of car. It's like a 1936. This would be a fancy car. Like it's big and it's like a fancier car, not just a regular automobile like Lefty Lewis had. Like this would be a fancy car. And remember, Herman E. Calloway, he's a musician, so he probably has a little bit of money. So he's, talking about, oh yeah, you and your dad have such a nice car, but really we don't know if it's Bud's dad or not. And Bud clearly has never even seen the car, so he's just agreeing, like, yep, yeah, whatever you say, because he really has no clue. We turned around the corner and my heart started jumping around in my stomach. Halfway down the street was a building that looked like it was made out of giant chopped down trees, the log cabin. Uh-oh. Right outside the place was a sign that said, appearing Friday through Sunday in July, Herman E. Calloway and the Nubbin Kings of the New Deal. My father has joined a new band. Lefty Lewis pulled up next to a car that was as long as a big boat. He said, there's the Packard. He's here. So this car, he said, is as long as a boat, the Packard, this fancy car that Herman E. Calloway has. I had to think real fast. I couldn't let Lefty Lewis and Herman E. Calloway talk to each other. If they did, I'd be on the first thing smoking back to Flint. And besides, I felt kind of bad about lying to Mr. Lewis. I wish I didn't have to. Lefty Lewis cut off the car and pulled the key out of the dashboard. I said, Mr. Lewis, this is going to be very embarrassing for me. What is, Bud? Can I go talk to my father myself, sir? I swear I'll turn myself into him. Mr. Lewis looked at me kind of hard. Well, Bud, I don't mean to sully your reputation, but you just ran away from the man all the way across the state. I think I'd better hand deliver you. But Mr. Lewis, sir, I need to explain it to him by myself. I promise I'll go in and not run away. Lefty Lewis looked out of the windshield like he was thinking. He reached back across the seat and put his hand in the twine, keeping my suitcase together. He said, I'll tell you what, Bud. You don't go anywhere without this, do you? I said, no, sir. Okay, here's the deal. I'll give you, he looked at his wristwatch, 5 minutes to talk to your dad alone. If you're not back by then, I'll bring the bag in for you. It wasn't great, but it would have to do. Besides, it gave me some more time to think. So obviously, Mr. Lewis and Herman E. Calloway can't talk to each other because Herman E. Calloway has never met Bud. Okay, like literally has no clue that Bud's on it. Well, besides that telegram, but he doesn't even know who Bud is. So if Mr. Lewis and Herman E. Calloway had a conversation, neither of them would actually know what was going on. So Bud has to figure out like how to get them not to talk. So he's just like, oh no, it's gonna be embarrassing. My dad's gonna be mad at me. I'll just talk to him myself. No big deal, It gave me some more time to think. Please promise that you won't look inside of it, sir. He raised his hand. You got my word. I got out of the car and walked to the front of the log cabin. The doors looked like they were made out of chopped down trees, just like the rest of the building. I looked back at Lefty Lewis and he was still watching. So I opened one of the doors. I knew it was one of those doors that Mama had been talking about. I walked in to see what was going to happen. Shucks. There was another set of regular doors inside. At restaurants, there's like 2 sets of doors sometimes. Like you open it up. And then there's another set of doors. So that's what happened. He's like, oh, I'm opening the door to my future. And then he's like, oh, look, more doors. Cool. The front door closed behind me and I was in the dark. I tried the other door. It came open, but I didn't push it all the way. I waited, then went back out to get my bag. I walked over to the driver's side of Lefty Lewis's car and smiled. Thank you very much, sir. He's in there. He was so glad to see me that I'm not even in a whole lot of trouble. He's real busy right now and told me to tell you thank you very much and that he'd get a hold of you. Lefty Lewis smiled. Well, he might be happy now, but if I know anything about your daddy, I expect you're going to be having problems sitting down before the night's over. Now, I know he's going to tell you this, but I got to add my 2 cents. Son, there just aren't too many places a young Negro boy should be traveling by himself, especially not clear across Michigan. There's folks in this state that make your average Ku Kluxer look like John Brown. You know who John Brown is, sir? No, sir. That's all right. He's out there moldering somewhere. But the point is, you're very lucky this time. You've got to be good and stay put. I know your dad's not the easiest man in the world, but believe me, he's mellowed out a lot from when it was just him and your sister. The next time you're of a mind to do a little traveling, you come down in the first train station and ask for Lefty Lewis first. I won't tell anyone, but we need to talk before you set out on your own again. Lefty Lewis. Think you can remember that name? Lefty Lewis. Well, at least he was using the alias all over and not just with me and his family in Flint. He handed my bag out the window. Okay, get back in there and tell your daddy I said hello. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I stood waving until the big car turned into the street. I sucked in a jumbo gulp of air and opened the front door. This time I pushed the second set of doors open and walked in. All right, so we're going to stop right there. We are going to answer a Google Classroom question for me. And it's just going to be, what do you think is going to happen next? He walked into the door, and what do you think is going to happen in the rest of chapter 12? You just need to write me a teeny little sentence or two. What do you think is going to happen next? What do you think is going to happen when he meets Hermione Calloway? So I am going to type that in your Google Classroom, and you have till tomorrow before reading RTI.
No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that.
Yeah, we can, because I want to know your prediction. What do you think is going to happen next? So that's your homework. It is due before reading RTI tomorrow. Give me 1 minute before it's posted, and then you guys can do that. Okay?
We still got 2 minutes. Why we still ain't reading? It was getting too good.
I agree.
I'm trying to find out who this man is to him. Is she froze?
Yeah, she's definitely froze for me.
She froze for me too. Come on. Dang it. All right, bye, y'all. See y'all on my RTI. And
She's
frozen. Yeah, she is frozen. All right, well, bye. Bye.
You do your homework by tomorrow. Sorry that it kicked me out. Your homework